Hello, this is the Provoked Prawn, and this is Corsair's Frame 5000D. Now, this is a pretty interesting case, but one that has two significant problems with it that I want to talk to you about before I get into the full review. And this is pretty obvious almost immediately when I first got it out of the box, and you might well be able to see it as well, and that is this issue with the rear left foot, which I noticed was pretty wonky. And then when I started to move it around, it became very loose and very wobbly. Now, I reported this issue to Corsair, and they sent me a new one on the basis that maybe the original one was damaged in transit and in shipping. So with the second one that you can see, it actually was perfectly fine, which is obviously good news. Initially, there was no issues with the foot here. Now, I have built in this case in multiple different ways, as you'll see when I get into the review, and I'm going to do build guides separately as well. And as you can see, there's a lot of possibilities here. But with doing all this building, I found that the problem with the wobbly foot has come back again. So what you'll see is that after crafting it in multiple ways, again, that same foot is being problematic. It became loose and then eventually just came off in my hand, which is obviously not ideal. However, there is a solution to it, luckily. You can peel off the rubber base of the foot, and then you'll see there's a screw underneath. So you can then just screw it back in. So obviously this is an issue potentially with the case, but one that you can sort out yourself. So if you do find that it's loose, you can screw it back in, re-secure it to the bottom, and then it should be perfectly fine there. So it's a minor point, but one that I wanted to point out in case you buy the case and you have the same issue. And you can see now once screwed back in, it's nice and solid in that position there, so no problems. The other issue I had was again with the case where I first got it out of the box. I found that this bottom airflow panel I actually managed to bend ever so slightly, and this was the same problem I had with the Corsair Frame 4000D. This airflow panel at the bottom is just too flimsy. It's really easy to bend, really easy to damage, so I'd highly recommend removing it from the case during the build process and only reinserting it once you've finished building, because if you lean on it or anything else, you'll find that you can really easily damage it there. So with that out of the way, let's have a look at the rest of the case and the other things of interest as we go through. I'm going to go through a bunch of different things here, so I'll leave timestamps down below so you can jump to relevant points in the video. But as you'll see, I've done certain things with it, like used the standard fans, vertically mounted the graphics card, used the 360mm all-in-one cooler on the top and on the side, and more besides. So there are different versions of this case. This is the standard one with standard RS fans. You can also get ARGB fans, but it comes with 4 140mm RS fans, 3 140s on the front and 1 at the rear. You also have options because you can put a 360mm radiator on the front or the side, or up to a 420mm radiator on top. So plenty of space here. Down the bottom, you can put 120mm fans on the PSU shroud and 2 120 or 140mm below that. You can also put a 340mm on the side and 340mm on the top. I'm using 120s in my build because I didn't have quite enough 140 to go throughout, but you can do it if you want to. So there's loads of space in here. And like the Frame 4000D, the 5000 will take up to 200mm fans on the front and uses Corsair's InfiniRail system on the top and on the front panels, so you can adjust these and then screw your fans into it. You'll see those clips on the InfiniRails are already screwed in as well. You get a lot of accessories in the box, including Corsair's quick turn fan screws, which are pretty handy. And additionally, as I've mentioned, you can put extra fans down the bottom if you want to. So in order to do the bottom fans, you first have to remove the PSU shroud, which you can see here. This is held in place with a couple of screws on the front, and then you can access the bottom. Now, down the bottom, you can put up to 2 120mm or 2 140mm fans. They provide these long screws for this so that they screw in from above and secure to the case that way rather than from underneath. Now, this is interesting because you only get 8 of these screws, so this is another minor problem with the case that you'll see if you want to do the same, because if you want to put 220mm fans on top of the PSU shroud as well, there aren't actually enough screws to do this because you need those long radiator screws. So I had to use my own. Luckily, I've got some long black radiator screws knocking around just as a spare accessories, and I use those. But if you wanted to, you'd have to buy these additionally because you just don't have enough screws included from Corsair, which is a weird oversight from them. Pretty unusual. However, you might not want to bother filling up the case. I'll show you what difference it makes later on with adding all these extra fans in here, but I did want to demo how you can do it and what it would look like by the end of it. So some interesting points there. And as you can see, the case is now looking really nice. I've swapped it out with RGB fans, and you can get a version of the case that does come with those RGB versions, as I've said. This case will support a variety of different motherboard sizes, and ATX is obviously the standard in this instance, but you can use standard motherboards and rear connect motherboards. It has some interesting highlights to it, even if you're using a standard motherboard setup, as I'll show you, because the cable hiding trays are really neat. But with a rear connect one, obviously, you can put all the cables at the rear and make everything even cleaner. And that's what you can see for the most part through the setup that I've got going on here. So you'll see nothing visible basically from this once you've set it up nicely and you've got all the cable shame hidden at the rear. But with a standard motherboard, obviously, we've got a variety of different points where cables are going to need to run through from below, from the side and from the top to plug into the motherboard and be connected up there. There are some nice ports down the bottom here where you can see rubber grommets where the cables get hidden nicely. And you also have these removable trays above the motherboard and to the side of it. You can remove that out of the way, plug in your power cables at the top, for example, and then put it back and nestle those away so they're mostly hidden from view. This is a nice little feature. It's a little bit fiddly to do, as you can see me struggling with it, but once you've got it in place, it ends up looking really clean because of it, and I think it's a really nice addition, a simple one too. The side panel here is also removable. There's an included blanking plate if you're using a rear connect motherboard, so you can hide the motherboard tray away as well there. And then obviously you can hide your fan cables and other connective cables underneath the cable hiding tray, put that back and hide those behind it and neaten things up that way. This is a really nice feature of the case. Obviously it's pretty common to have these, but the fact that you can remove it and adjust things is really nice. The other nice little highlight is the simple inclusion of an anti-sag bracket for your graphics card that you can see here. You unscrew it and then you just simply adjust it up and down into the relevant position that will be useful, and then tighten it back up again. Here I'm using it with a 4070 Ti Super, but if you had a longer GPU, there's an additional little rubber mount that you can put on top of this so it doesn't press up against the fan blades of a bigger card. So of course there's seemingly thought of a few different things there. The other thing you can do is you can remove the rear PCIe bracket, so you can see you can unscrew that from multiple ports and flip it round. This enables you to relatively easily do vertical mounting for your GPU. Now you will need to get an additional riser cable like this one from Corsair, which essentially allows you to plug into the motherboard and then sit your graphics card in it. But you have these accessories included with the case that are secure to the power supply unit shroud. So there's a couple of standoffs that screw in here. Now, naturally, you can't use fans on this bracket if you're planning to do this, but you put those into there and then you seat the riser cable down on it. Now, you can also run your graphics card power cable through that gap that I showed you earlier on. So where the rubber grommets are, you can run your cable through there pretty easily. But once you've done that, you can then secure the riser cable to the PSU shroud and then plug the other end into the X16 PCIe slot on your motherboard, and then you'll be able to plug the GPU into it. Now, there's an excess of cable here because it is a 300mm cable in this instance, so it looks like it takes up quite a lot of room. As you can see, it's got a bit of a bend in it, but you can see the setup process for this is pretty straightforward. The other thing I found, at least with the 4090 that I'm using in this instance, is it doesn't seem to sit too close to the glass with this riser cable, which is nice because it's not going to get choked by the glass when you're gaming and end up with very little airflow, so that's definitely a benefit. One downside though is that the anti-sag bracket now won't reach, so you don't have the same support there, but you can see that it's pretty easy to secure it in place, plug your power cables in without worry, and then just game away happily with it. and my experience is actually not too bad. So this is the standard fan setup with 3 intake fans on the front, 1 exhaust at the rear, Nautilus 360mm all-in-one cooler on there, and you can see the GPU is basically somewhere in the 60 to 70 degrees C mark. CPU is running at 62 during the pre-sync testing. Now I'll show more thermal performance testing later on in the various different setups, but I just want to quickly highlight that vertical mounting is an option. It doesn't seem to get too toasty. Now, if you look at the case itself, we break it down and go through a few other things of interest, one of which is the amount of potential storage that you can put in this case. So at the back, there are a couple of different brackets that you can use, and also down the bottom here. So right next to the power supply unit, there's a bracket here. Now, if you remove that, you'll see it's very similar to one on the rear, but this allows you to mount 1 hard disk drive and 2 SSDs to it. And so you can do this pretty easily. So you've got 2 SSDs from Crucial here. I'm going to mount to this bracket. They'll mount to the rear of it, and then it will secure down to the bottom of the case. Once again, if you were doing that, you can't put fans down the bottom. So obviously you have to think about whether you want fans or storage. Those are the options. But if you want to maximize storage, you could use this bracket on the back of the case and the one at the bottom of the case. You could potentially have 4 SSDs on there and then 2 hard disk drives in that combination. And then there's another place where you can put 2 more SSDs. So you could have 6 2.5-inch SSDs as standard. The wiring for those is hidden away at the rear, as you can see there, so the ports on them. And actually, if you use it behind the motherboard tray, as you can see here, popping that one into place, it looks really neat because you can't even see the drives, so they're kind of hidden there, which is pretty interesting in the way this has been designed. Obviously, being able to remove that tray is also handy if you want to put brackets on the back of your motherboard for coolers. With the hard disk drive, that also mounts to this. Now, it does screw to it, and there's no anti-vibration mounting for it, so it might get a bit noisy with a platter hard drive, but if you do use traditional drives, you can just secure it to this same bracket and then pop it in there. So SSDs on one side, hard disk drive on the other, and then just wire them all in. Now, I did find that you probably need 2 SATA power cables for this because it's a bit tricky to reach the different ports with just one, but obviously that's going to vary depending on your power supply unit and the cabling that comes with it. But it's nice to have all these storage options. Below that, as I said, you've got these 2 removable SSD trays. You could use those alternatively or in combination with that, so you can put more drives in there. And then you've got absolutely loads of storage at the back. You'll also notice when looking at the back, the interesting design of the rear motherboard. The tray back there has this pegboard style, which I'll get to in a second, which is another intriguing design from Corsair in the way they've set things up. Now, if you're not using drives, you could put a controller on that rear plate instead. So this is an RGB controller from Thermalright that I used in my build with the RS140 RGB fans because I wanted to be able to control the RGB from all of them. And there's so many 5-volt RGB connectors for these fans. But basically, you could put that there instead, and then you can use that as a central wiring hub. You could use IQ Link controllers in there as an alternative. Now, you also have a variety of different options for cable management, which is going to become pretty important. You have these removable little clips that you can see here, and there's extras included in the box. So essentially, these are cable ties which have multiple areas that you can tie into, but you need to remove the Velcro tie to access this little pin to pull that out to then reposition them. So you have to take that out with the little peg, put it in a different place, and then put the peg back, and then re-secure the Velcro. It's a little bit fiddly and a bit of a faff, but it is worth noting that as the process for doing it, because if you just try and pull these off and then push them back in, you'll end up breaking them. And I'll tell you that from experience because I actually did it because I didn't realize you first had to remove that peg, and that resulted in some problems with mine, where essentially these clips are not easy to secure anymore because they got broken. So just watch out. Don't just try and push them in or pull them out. You have to first remove that peg. Minor point, but as you can see, you can put them in several different positions around the back of the motherboard, and this enables you to be able to tidy up the cables a little bit. The downside to this is, although as you'll see, the accessories box includes a lot of things, including plastic cable ties, I didn't find a lot of places for cable management, as we'll get to in a minute, and you'll see my shame. But you've seen how many different ways I'm building this. Now, one of the other things included in the box is this side panel, a radiator or fan tray, which you can use as an alternative to the cable hiding tray that I showed you already. So you can take out that standard tray and put this in instead and throw in more fans into the build, or a radiator on the side. You can put up to 340mm fans on here. I'm using 120mm in this instance, or a 360mm radiator as the options. And so you've got the ability to add in more cooling. I've set these up as intake fans. Now what you'll see here is those plastic cable ties are available there, but there didn't seem to be many points to actually be able to use them. So I mostly used the Velcro ties, and it ended up being a real cable mess. I know people will criticize me for this, but I knew I was going to be taking it apart and putting it back together again in maximum ways. And the good news is, even if you are messing with your cable management, as I am, you can see you can just close the back panel and hide your shame away without any problems. Now, that bottom panel that I showed you earlier on in the video that's easy to bend does also come with a couple of different setups. So as standard, it has this sort of opaque plastic on it. You can put this airflow dust protector in there instead and have it like this. And this is obviously useful if you're putting fans in the bottom, because it allows them to get more access to air. Or if you're not doing that, you can put this blanking one in, which is basically a white sheet on the white case that hides away the visibility of what's going on below, and will hide away some of the cable shame and the power supply unit and other things if you don't want to see those. So you can do that, and then you can just pop it back in place and do that. But you can see me using the dust filter one there. It means you can see the fans still, and they get good airflow through them as well. Dust trays, there's a large one at the bottom that you can take out, and the front of the case you can pull off the front cheese grater panel, and then the dust filter on that also comes out. Those are pretty easy to remove, and as you can see, it's quite a fine mesh dust filter, so it should be pretty easy to stop dust getting into the case over time and to clean that up pretty easily as well. With the rear door, when you pop that off, you'll find a similar sort of setup that also has a dust filter on, which will be useful if you are putting fans or a radiator into the case on the side as I've shown. And you can take this out as well. It is a little bit fiddly, as you can see there, though, because it's got plastic clips at the top and the bottom which sort of notch into the rear door, so it's a little bit fiddly, but you can get it out with relative ease. And then you can see that's a nice clean setup, potentially long term. Now, another thing of note is the case has 4 USB-A front panel ports, which means you end up with those 2 fat connectors and one small one for the USB-C. And this is an issue because you'll probably find that your motherboard only has one of those ports. Both motherboards that I used in this build only have one USB-A port on them, which means you can't connect both. And I haven't found a good splitter that actually works for this, so it might be a problem. Now, you can get some motherboards that do have 2 ports for this, but it's pretty rare. I haven't seen them very often, and so it might be an issue for you too. Essentially, you can't use all 4 ports on the front of the case, and I wanted to note that in case you're wondering about it. With the non-RGB version of this case, the fans come connected up and wired already. The front 3 fans are daisy chained together with these power connectors that you can see, and then they just end up with a single connector on the end that plugs into the chassis fan header or system fan header on your motherboard. So you require 2 connections, one for the rear fan, one for the front. Go into the BIOS, set them to PWM mode, and maybe run a fan tuning setup on them, and then you've got a basic setup pretty much immediately for those fans really easily, and they're actually pretty quiet, and as I'll show, quite decent. Now, if you wanted to quickly look at the 5000 against the 4000, you can see the Frame 4000 in black there. You can see how much bigger the Frame 5000 is, quite significantly, and that makes a big difference. There are other little hidden features on the case as well, small things. You'll see the Corsair logo on the side panel here, for example. You can peel that off and just get rid of it if you don't want it. Or alternatively, you can use this Corsair branding instead, which comes with a little sticky back plastic. You just pop it on there and then secure that to there. So you can have Corsair emblazoned down the side instead, which is another option. So you've got a few different options of the design of it and what it looks like on the inside. If you're a big Corsair fan, you can easily do this. And that's included in the accessories box. So this sticker is set up there and you can just pop that into place. Now, with the mounting of the radiator as well as top mounting, I wanted to be able to show how to side mount it. You can do that. And out of curiosity, you'll see the fans are still at the rear there, and you'll see that there is space. So in theory, it is possible to do push-pull here. I didn't actually do it, but you can fit it. You can see it will fit, so it is possible to do. However, I don't think you can do tubes at the bottom of the radiator in this setup because it would get in the way of the graphics card. It certainly will on this rear connect motherboard for me anyway. So I ended up with tubes at the top. I don't think it's a big issue. As I've discussed before, it's not a big problem there. What you will see here is that the fan tray can actually be flipped around, and I did find that I had to do this. So if you want to, you have to have the sort of bracketing at the back. So there's a little bit of edging that sits over the rear if you want to secure it, because you'll need to do that so that the radiator doesn't press up against the front fans. This means the rad sits over a bit to the right as seen from the rear and then is secured that way. There are a lot of cables to deal with when you get the RGB fans in the setup, as you can see, but the tubes can be tucked away and tidied up nicely, and I think it ends up looking pretty good in this build. I was quite happy with how it came out, and I'll show you in a minute a comparison of the temperatures. Now, if you're going to use the RS fans, I'd suggest Signal RGB is a good option here because they're connected to the motherboard with a 5V RGB connector, and now all the fans are controlled by Signal RGB, and you can get a variety of different nice lighting effects there. Now for testing, starting off with the original setup I had, vertically mounted 4090 and a 9800X3D from AMD. Now in this setup, you can see the score is 1165, maximum temperature we're looking at 77 degrees on Cinebench. This is actually the worst score for Cinebench, note that as we go through, but it is with the standard fans and just the all-in-one cooler mounted on the top. Then for some general game testing, I want to show you the performance here through a number of different games, playing at 4K on each of these. And so you'll see, generally speaking, through each of these games that basically we get pretty good temperatures in this setup. We're looking at somewhere around 60 to 70 degrees on the GPU. Bear in mind it's vertically mounted at this point. And about 60 degrees to 66-ish on the CPU as well. So it did really well across a number of different games. Now in this setup now, we're looking at maximum fans. So fans down the bottom and on the side, and radiators still at the top. And now you can see the score is higher in Cinebench. You get 1217 instead. The temperature is about 1 degree toastier, but the addition of the extra fans means we're getting a better score there. With the gaming performance, what I found is it's still pretty similar though. The GPU is perhaps a little bit cooler in the standard position versus vertically mounted, but minor difference. The CPU is again 60 to 65 degrees C across a number of these different games. So both setups are really nice. Now I've got a 4070 Ti Super in here instead of the 4090 in this position, so it's worth noting there is a slight difference, and I'll leave all the specs down below so you can find those. But the overall experience has been a really good one across the board on this. I didn't find that the fans got too loud either, even with loads of extra fans. As you see, when I maxed out the case, it isn't too noisy, and that's really nice too. However, that said, the temperature difference for gaming, as you can see from a variety of these games, isn't that significant, so perhaps the addition of the fans on the bottom isn't really necessary. Now this is obviously going to vary. If you're using a high-end GPU like a 5090 that draws more power, it might make a difference, but with a 4070 Ti Super at least, it wasn't making a massive difference having those additional fans down there. To either the CPU or the GPU, the temperatures weren't massively different with the addition of those fans. So actually that's pretty impressive, because it means that the basic pre-installed fans that come with a case were good enough in combination with the 360mm cooler. Now, however, putting the radiator on the side of the case with intake fans instead, we have increased the score on Cinebench. So we've got a better score on Cinebench. It's now 1270, which is the highest score I got out of the testing. The overall temperature got to a maximum of 82, so it was a little bit hotter. But on average during this testing, the CPU is running cooler across the cores, so it is actually performing better in this setup with the side-mounted intake on the all-in-one cooler. So this is preferable if you want to maximize the cooling performance. The CPU temperatures are still comparable, and the GPU temperature hasn't been negatively affected, as you can see with the side-mounted AIO either. So if you might think that you're getting warm air being sucked through the radiator now that might affect the GPU, actually the performance doesn't show that. So it's just generally been good in this setup. And this is my preference usually is a side mounted all-in-one cooler, especially if you've got a high-end CPU that does draw a lot of power and does get hot. It can help by just bringing the temperature down, and the Cinebench score showed that, and the general gaming experience also showed that it still performed really well. So just generally speaking, in a variety of setups here, this Corsair case has performed really nicely, and I was really happy with it. The other important takeaway, and I'll show a clip of this in a second, is that even with the additional fans, it didn't get too loud during gaming, so it runs really well during that testing. So I have had some minor complaints about the case, but as you can see, there are a lot of good features about it too. You've got a nice little RGB strip at the bottom on the front of the case, for example, and you also have all those other things like the anti-sag bracket and the cable hiding trays and a lot more. So there's a lot going for this case, and it did prove pretty easy to build in. So stick around now to hear a sound test of just gaming without any of the audio of the game, so you can hear what the fan noise is like, and hopefully this has helped. Thanks very much for watching. You've made it right to the end of the video, you brilliant legend you. If you've enjoyed it, click that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and drop me a comment down below if you've got any questions. If you really enjoyed it, consider joining the channel and see the benefits of doing so. Check out these other videos, you might well find them interesting or useful, and most importantly, have a great life.